Says we're going. Okay. Hey, everybody. I don't remember what numbered episode this is. Maybe Podlomatic 28, somewhere in that realm. Or maybe 30. I can't even remember. It's been a while. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to a gentleman named Reagan Lodge.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome. I've been wanting to talk to you for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm very busy. It's hard for me to remember invitations.
That's all right, man. It's actually a pleasure to talk to you. I've been following your work for a while, and I don't know, reading your biography and stuff, and well, from what's online and all that stuff. It's like, wow,
Right.
this is a really interesting person. So I've been looking forward to it. In case anyone doesn't know, why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Reagan Lodge. If you want to find my work, just go to reaganlodge.com. And I'm across all different platforms as just Reagan Lodge, pretty much Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, Newgrounds. That's the best way to find me. As far as my introductions, do you want me to start with where I'm at just right now?
Um, I guess just an overview of what you do. I have a lot of specific
Okay,
questions, of course, because I
I'll
cheated.
start with what I do right now. So basically, I work a mixture of farm labor, truck driving, and on a graphic novel called Wyatt, which is my main focus right now. I don't take freelance commissions. Pretty much all my creative energy is going into this book solely at the moment, and so that's pretty much my main thing right now. And aside from that, when I'm not working, I'm usually in the gym working out,
Mhm.
and yeah.
How long have you been drawing?
I didn't start drawing until kind of late in life, actually. I started when I was a junior in high school,
Mm.
when I got switched to a kind of independent study program at a charter school, because I was a miserable failure at every other school leading up to that. And because I kind of excelled at self-directed study, I found myself with a lot of free time. And I started browsing this old website called Elfwood. It's not around anymore, but it's like a really old Web 1.0 fantasy art website. And there were two artists on there in particular who I found called Matt Rhodes, he's now the art director of BioWare, and Tracy Butler, who is the comic artist of the webcomic Lackadaisy Cats. And when I saw their artwork, I immediately knew that I wanted to start drawing. And from there, I just started practicing like 5 hours a day to catch up with everybody else who was my age.
Mhm. Do you think you had an advantage or disadvantage learning at that age?
Um, I think the one advantage I had was realizing how much time I had lost. And
Mm.
that really just lit a fire under my ass to make me work really hard in ways that maybe people who had drawn all their lives didn't have to do.
Mhm.
But I think in the end, I think it evened out. I mean, I'm more or less on the same average level, I think, as people in my peer group who have also been drawing their entire lives. Because, there were some years later on, like in my mid 20s, late 20s, where I was drawing very little, actually, and it set me back by several years.
Uh-huh.
So I think you have to look at it in the terms of the long game, really. Like, yeah, I was excelling wildly during that time and getting a lot of praise from what little exposure I had. But then there were periods after that where I definitely crashed and had to do a big epic comeback.
I think when you say junior in high school, that was when
Mhm.
I also started taking drawing more seriously. When I started to realize I'm going to graduate at some point and I'm going to have to choose a job.
Yeah,
Did you want to, at that age, what was it, 16, 17-ish?
yeah,
Did
it's
you
about the same for me.
you felt the job the job field coming, and did you think that art was going to be a profession, or you just wanted to do it because you loved it so much?
Well, it started off originally because I needed an image of my D&D character, which I never actually got to play because there was nobody to play it with. Yeah, that's my life growing up in rural California.
Hmm.
But then I fell so in love with the process of drawing because I tried to be a writer. Like I always had ideas for stories, but nobody would give me the time of day when you hand them a big pile of words and stuff. But if you gave them a picture to go with your ideas, suddenly you've got their attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I did that, like I think it was after about maybe, I mean, I knew pretty much overnight that I was going to draw the rest of my life. And then I think within a month, I knew that I wanted to make this a career. And yeah, part of it was because, adulthood was somewhere on the horizon. And, I'd grown up in rural San Diego. My dad was a farmer and my mom was a nurse. And I couldn't see myself working in either of those. And I didn't really have any other skills. And this was like the one thing that seemed like a life raft that I could kind of cling to.
I don't know the San Diego area very well, but it seemed suburban to me. How big is the area? And you say rural?
It's actually really huge. So yeah, San Diego, obviously, everybody thinks of the downtown area where the Comic-Con goes on and stuff. And then after that, there's a big, wide suburban sprawl. And then as you get to where I'm at, up in the North County area, it's mostly Indian reservations and agriculture and some mining areas, and that's where I live. I'm so far out in the middle of nowhere that I did not have internet out here when I first moved back home last about almost 2 years ago. And I was trying a lot of mad science to get internet until eventually I found a cellular modem plan that was a good deal.
Wow, I'm learning a lot about this. I had no idea it was so rural in that direction. I know Northern California is more rural. At least I've heard.
Yeah. It is, yeah. This is very similar to Northern California.
Well, I guess in terms of chronologically, to piece together how you ended up to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
So it was rural. You drew a lot. Was it a sort of, gosh, I don't even know how to ask this, but like, did you have a lot of opportunities to, in school, I mean, draw a lot, but also hang out with friends, draw with them, or were you more of a loner type of guy?
Oh man. Well, all right. So I kind of liked drawing, like just not in any studied way, but just stick figures and funny stuff, and tracing from dinosaur books, like nothing that I would even call like art really, but it was just the kind of stuff that any kid would have done, even ones that aren't necessarily artists. And then in 8th grade, I had this incredibly mean teacher she was an art teacher, and she gave me an F in art because I was like, she would give us assignments where, she would want us to draw a particular thing, and I would get some wild idea and draw like a Monty Python Zeppelin or something on it. And she would fail me because I didn't follow her strict instructions on it. And so I just figured like, well, if this is art, this is stupid. So I gave up on anything creative for a while because of that. As far as being creative with my friends, I grew up extremely bullied. Like I regularly got in fist fights, stuff like that. And most of my friends, in a lot of my friends group, I was kind of seen as a joke, because I was overly agreeable. Because when you grow up in so much isolation, you're desperate for any kind of in-group acceptance, and you become overly agreeable, and kind of let yourself get mooched off of and walked over in a lot of ways. Basically, so I'll skip ahead a little bit to my 20s. Basically, well, the first jump forward to getting any kind of professional or professional foot in the door in the arts was when I went to a summer program at Cal Arts called the California State Summer School of the Arts. And this is part of why I kind of cringe when people say like, "Ooh, that's Cal Arts style." I'm like, okay, look, Cal Arts style can mean anything. When I was there, it was actually a really cool place. It was only like a month-long program that I was there, but it was very rigorous, and that really opened up a lot of doors for me in my head as far as how to discipline myself, and just brought in my options for a career with it. And so from there, I applied to a lot of different art schools. I got accepted into all of them. Got accepted to Cal Arts, Art Center, RISD, Alberta College of Art and Design, but I couldn't afford any of them. And so I just ended up having to just grind until I was able to get my first few freelance odd jobs. I worked for a body armor company called Armor Holdings Incorporated, doing kind of marketing illustrations. And then I was around, I think I was about 21 or 22. This was about 2006 or 7. I got messaged by Kazu Kibushi, who is the creator of the book Amulet. He saw some drawings I had done of this fox character, who you'll all probably recognize in a bit. And he told me, like, hey, I really like your work and I want you to do a story for Flight. And this kind of blew me away because Flight Comics at the time was like a very kind of, there was nothing like it. It was a really new anthology back when anthologies were, at least of this quality, were kind of rare.
Yeah.
And that was really what's launched me, gave me like a second big jump forward. And from there, I ended up working with them for a while, and that led to a short stint with Nickelodeon Magazine doing Avatar: The Last Airbender comics, which you can now find in the Dark Horse publishing run of it. And then it was around about 2008, 2009-ish. That's where I had just finished up one of my biggest Flight comics, or my biggest Flight comic ever. Is like almost like 50 pages, and I had this like overnight realization, the same way that I did with, how drawing became an overnight obsession for me. I was just working at my desk and kind of realized, like, I'm working 12 hours a day drawing these characters who are having all these adventures that I'm never going to have. And like, here I am in my mid 20s. I've already got dad bod, like the skinny fat look, and I'm just like wasting away. And, I was in a very emasculated situation in life. And just suddenly I just realized, like, I'm going to join the Marines.
Now, were you an athletic type of guy before that?
So from about elementary school until about mid high school, I was actually kind of a fat kid. But then in my last 2 years of high school, I took up swimming. So I leaned out pretty good. And then in my early 20s, I was in pretty good shape. But then as I got more and more steeped in freelance art, my physicality started to waste away a little bit. Like I wouldn't have looked like overweight or anything, but I was definitely, I was really slow. I was getting sick all the time. I was just not a healthy person. I was living off of ramen and all that stuff.
Well, of course, the natural question is, one does not just decide overnight to become a Marine. It takes an unbelievable amount of training, I would imagine. So what happened? Did you will your way through training, or did you get your butt kicked?
I had a long waiting period before I could go to boot camp because I wanted to become a combat illustrator. Mm-hmm. And because it was such a limited field to get into, there's a very limited number of slots that they would accept into the combat illustrator, or I should say combat media, combat camera, MOS field. I had to wait I think it was like 8 or 10 months in the delayed entry program. So I had a lot of time actually to really get myself into shape. And even then, like I got so sick, I got pneumonia so bad that I was hallucinating within the first week of boot camp that all of my gains that I had made prior to them were basically just blown away. I just had to start over from scratch in boot camp.
I always preface this by saying I don't mean to sound patronizing, but I find military life like really fascinating. So I hope you don't mind if I ask more about it. What was the boot camp experience like? Because you would have been in your mid-20s, you said?
Yeah, I was 24, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was like, I was one of the older guys, but not the oldest guy.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard you got in general, right? The younger guys are usually, the average age, I should say, is on the younger side.
Yeah, like 18 to 20 usually.
Mm-hmm. Did you find, how do I ask this? Was the experience of boot camp for, say, a Marine different than the other branches, or?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, it's a lot more hazing. It's also 13 weeks long, whereas the other branches are shorter by varying amounts. Um, the second hardest boot camp is the Coast Guard because they also do a lot of hazing from what I've heard. But I mean, for me, boot camp was like being in a improv comedy routine where you were not allowed to laugh. It was by far one of the most hilarious times of my life. Like it was so absolutely surreal. It was like being in a nonstop live action role play Monty Python skit.
In the sense that people were playing jokes on each other, or it was
You
so.
know, you just outrageous things would be happening. Like you would have drill instructors who were like, you know, they were hazing you to death, like forcing you to do push-ups till you puked, and then forcing you to push up and down in your puke. And they would tell, and while it's happening, they would be telling you to war cry, where you're just screaming at the top of your lungs nonstop.
Mhm.
And then they would tell you to silent war cry, where you basically just make a screaming face. You're not allowed to make any noise. And then they would say silent war cry louder. And it's just, or they would tell you to just, or I don't know, do stuff like, you know, strip you down to your underwear and cram you all into the showers and, you know, turn on scalding hot water. And it's,
Mhm.
you know, it's awful at the moment, but you realize like there's absolutely no use in being mad or sad about it. You just have to find it as hilarious as it is.
I remember hearing. Are you familiar with Jocko Willink's podcast?
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think he was a SEAL, and uh, he did a lot of high profile stuff in Iraq. But he was on Joe Rogan, those kinds of shows, and he's got a really good military podcast. And he talks about how the SEALs, what do they call it, Hell Week? It's
Yeah.
the whole beginning of their basic training is just to weed out the people who don't have what it takes, basically. All the hazing that you're listing out and all that stuff, it would be different from basic training, I would assume, for, say, American. I don't know about other countries, but like how the army deals with like the average, I don't mean average, but like, you know, infantry type person.
Right.
Like maybe they would try to harden the person as opposed to actively dissuade them from joining. Was that the purpose of the hazing?
No, really, it's basically. I mean, frankly, it's a giant cult induction, is what it is.
Huh.
You know, you're being inducted into the mysteries, basically, and you know, in order to kind of get people into that almost psychotic level of devotion to one another, the one of the good ways to do that is to have them go through just outrageous amounts of hardship with each other. And I mean, you're literally seeing the same 50 guys naked every night,
Mm-hmm.
and you're all like sleep deprived and all that. And it really is about forming like, you know, a camaraderie. I would say. I mean, yeah, some of it is outright sadism, depending on the drill instructors, but I think it's more about just shaping you into compliance with the rest of the group.
I see.
And so I would say I mean, yeah, it does weed people out, but it is more about salvaging, salvaging men and making them into a fighting unit.
Mm-hmm. I do want to ask about how this all relates to art, of course. I just find the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I joined the Marines because I found it to be the most aesthetically pleasing of the branches.
In what sense?
I mean, you look at everybody knows what the dress blues look like. It's really striking. It hasn't changed since I think like the 1930s or something, 1920s. And there's something just very pleasing about what the Marine Corps had going on, you know, from just an artist's standpoint. You know, like everything down from the type of camouflage they use to the shape of our covers or our caps. Like I just knew that, like, you know, if I'm going to be seen in any kind of uniform, I want to be in the one that I think looks coolest, frankly. And also, frankly, I had watched the movie Aliens at age 6, and that really, you know, some people will say like, oh yeah, it was Full Metal Jacket that made me want to join the Marines. Well, for me, it was Aliens. You know, that was that and Warhammer 40K. You know, that just kind of, I don't know. It's just sort, you know, media brainwashing me in a fun way. And I think a lot of the guys that I've, enlisted with were in some ways, they had kind of a romantic spirit to them. There's something a little bit more cultish and romanticized about the Marine Corps, and a lot of it is, let's be honest, is a little bit of propaganda. We like to have a lot of history and tradition and ceremonialism about what we do, and say that we're better than the other branches because of that. Which, I mean, I I think a lot of it's overblown, but you know, I was definitely taken in by it, and I still appreciate it greatly to this day. And the Marine Corps does have a very large uh, combat art program, actually, compared to other branches, which was partially how I got deployed to Afghanistan.
Well, I guess I could ask about that then.
Yeah.
Your role as a combat artist. Now, again, I've gone through. You can go to his website, which I'll leave the link down below, and look at some of his art. What was the average day like as a combat artist? What were your duties?
Well, so my deployment was actually not under the official role as a combat artist, but that was part of my bargaining chip for getting deployed. So basically, long story short, I was stationed at Quantico in Virginia, which is what would call a base unit, which means you're non-deployable. You're there to kind of support the bureaucracy of the Marine Corps. And I hated it so much there that I begged them to send me to Afghanistan. And the only way you can deploy out of Quantico is as an individual augment. So I was a combat photographer by MOS field. So they had to deploy me as a personal security detail, basically a bodyguard, convoy driver, that kind of guy. But part of the deal of me going over there, like getting my chain of command to be okay with letting go of me for about 6 or 7 months, was that I promised my master gunnery sergeant that I would do a big stack of sketchbooks while I was over there and submit them to the Marine Corps Museum's Combat Art Archive, which was basically what I did. As far as an average day, um, if we were doing a mission, you would basically be outside the wire, driving around Kabul in unmarked, crappily armored SUVs, driving around at breakneck speeds through traffic and pedestrians and stuff, escorting, various DVs, or DV means distinguished visitors, but another word for VIPs. And whenever there was a lull in activity, like if you're sitting in your vehicle for hours on the airfield flight line waiting for your guys to arrive, I would just be sketching. I would be drawing the guys who were hanging out outside the vehicle as they chewed on dip, or just hung out, or I would be drawing local Afghans doing stuff, or the Mongolian camp guards and what have you. So a lot of life drawing, just kind of like whatever was going on around me at the time. And then once I was done, I would stuff my sketchbook back into my flak vest, and then we would go on our way.
Well, as you were talking, I'm writing down like a million interesting questions. What was, I guess the first question would be, you wanted to go to Afghanistan. Was it, with the years that you went, did you know, or what was the temperature of the country at that time? It was hardcore at the time, right?
I was there from late 2012 to summer 2013, so it was not at its most violent. I wouldn't say it was at a total lull. I mean, because we definitely ran into some things out there, but it was a little bit more chill than say, like if you watch any of the documentaries that depict like Helmand Province. It was nothing like that. That was more like Wild West, whereas where I was at was a little bit weirder and almost like an entirely different type of war.
I'm just, as if anyone hears me typing, I'm typing more questions.
Yeah.
I think this is so interesting. I would imagine that out there you might have a lot of time to think.
Oh, yeah.
And talk to people in a very unusual situation. What did you learn anything about human nature out there? How did it change? Like, say if you had stayed in the States, whatever you would imagine you would have thought about life there. What kinds of things did you observe and learn out there?
I would say definitely when I was out there, for me, it was the closest thing that I could describe to what some various tribes throughout human history would call like a ritual induction into manhood in the tribe or something like that. Because when I was out there, I was only around other guys for the bulk of the time. We had a few women in the unit towards the end as I was on my way out. And, there were a couple around camp, but it really did have a cognitive effect in ways that I kind of tasted a little bit in boot camp. But in boot camp, you really don't have much time to think because you're just busy doing crap all the time.
Yeah.
But when I was over there, I really had a lot of time to, um, I don't know, get a taste of what Yukio Mishima describes as the transformation of sun and steel, where I was, if you had free time, you're doing nothing but weightlifting. So I was just getting jacked as hell and eating whatever I could from the European chow hall and hanging out with other guys of various nationalities, like Hungarians, Mongolians, Brits, Canadians, Australians, and what have you. And I don't know. To me, that really, I knew that I had been searching for that kind of experience my entire life, but I never knew the words for it. It's like it took me a lot of years to realize why exactly I had the sudden arresting urge to join the Marines. And I think part of it just came from the fact that growing up, I didn't really have any close male bonding. Although my dad and I have a great friendship now, it was really rough when I was younger. He was just, had trouble relating to us. And, when you're in isolation like that, you kind of get sick of the people you see every single day, like, your brother and your dad and what have you. And so going to, Afghanistan for me was kind of this experiencing a level of male friendship that I could not have imagined before. And a lot of people today would look at that and giggle and be like, oh, that's it's repressed sexuality or something, when it's it goes utterly beyond that. It's almost like an ancient Greek ideal of male friendship or biblical level of love, frankly, that you have between other men, that is just completely a sense of devotion that it's really hard to put into words. Mm-hmm. Back home. I know that in Greek language, there's probably a word for it.
Maybe. I'm trying to think of once I've talked. I can't remember. I've had this conversation a bunch of times with different people. C.S. Lewis famously had a book called or concept of the four loves in Greek that he talks about. But
yeah,
I'm trying to think of friendship. I guess there was a friendship one. Brother, not brotherhood. But yeah, I certainly I would understand. I guess as a Greek person, there's so many different words for love. I guess, but what you're describing, I would assume, in a society. I'm not going to start my sentence. In our everyday life, I don't think we're pushed to the kinds of limits that you would be pushed way out there.
Right.
How many people have talked about this ad nauseum, where it's your life is in the hands of the man next to you, and mm-hmm. you better get close to him, or you guys are both of you are toast. So
right,
something strange and kind of beautiful occurs, I suppose. I've read a lot of books about military life and that sort of thing, and I grew up in this weird little pocket of time where I was so paranoid about getting drafted that I guess in middle school I gave myself I just nonstop read books about war, and I assumed I would get drafted. So I'm such a sensitive kid, that I'm I don't even know how I'm not going to cry when I get shot. I was telling myself.
I mean, that's the thing. I'm the same way. I was actually, I'm in my teens and all throughout most of my childhood, I was a very sensitive kid, and I do actually think of myself as still a very sensitive guy. I think I'm affected emotionally by a lot of things that maybe a lot of guys in the Marines I was around weren't. I don't cry easily, but I feel like I'm a lot more swept away by certain sensory or aesthetic experiences that that a lot of guys I was around maybe didn't quite have the same eye for.
I can cheat and ask this while we're on that topic.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, landscapes and all that sort of thing. Was it, did it feel different out there?
Yeah, it's man, I don't I my the biggest thought that I had when I was out there was that I mean, it was just an incredibly haunted place. Like I actually, I would look at these mountains, the Hindu Kush mountains off in the distance, or when we would, for what little forays we did into, the hilly terrain and stuff, we would see these old wreckages of old Soviet armor and stuff, down at the bottom of a canyon where they had presumably been blasted off of the roadside by Mujahideen, 30 years prior. And I just had this eerie sense that the place was very haunted, and yet at the same time, it's just incredibly beautiful. It was, I mean, despite all the smog and trash everywhere, but it's. I did find that like I was. It did leave a tremendous impression on me. Just the realization that like every empire has come through here pretty much, with the exception of the Romans. You had the ancient Greeks under Alexander, even prior to that, the Indo-European Aryan invasion that swept through there out of the Caucasus, and then you had the Mongol invasion, and then you had the British, and even before that, the Arab conquests and so on, and just that place just eats empires, and even the Mongols, they were the only ones who I guess could really subdue it. I know. I guess the Greeks managed to for a while, but because they Hellenized everything. But it's just I don't know. It's a fascinating place. It seems like it's fascinating and kind of haunting at the same time.
That's really, man. I just love that it's when you learn about history of certain places, you just kind of go there and meditate on it, and it's like you can feel the history of it, and it's so. For someone like yourself, I'm sure I call myself like an artsy fartsy type. Like it just moves me to think like, I don't know. I love, there's a certain timelessness that like you see a mountainside and you think, wow, like we're just a blip in history. And it's such a privilege just to be a witness.
Yeah. I mean, you would look at these mountains and just wonder like, somewhere in those rocks buried under there is a shield left by one of Alexander's troops as he got whacked or whatever, or swords left by Hindu Indians, or rusted rifles left by the British, and of course plenty of Soviet trinkets around. I actually managed to come home with some of those.
Cool.
Funny story about that little legacy. Later on, when I went into art school on the GI Bill, I had this figure drawing professor named Albert Epstein. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago due to, I think it was esophageal cancer. Dude smoked like a chimney. But he was Russian, taught at the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts, and he was a notorious hard ass. Like he would make students cry in the classroom with his level of critique.
Wow.
And he came down extra hard on me because, like one day he asked me, like, Reagan, were you military, man? And I told him, like, yeah, I was in the Marines. And he asked me if I went to Afghanistan. And I said, yeah. And he's asked me, which part? I told him Kabul. And he's like, I see. And if we started talking later on, I found out that he was also in Afghanistan, in Kabul, in 1983 as a Soviet paratrooper.
Wow.
And we were able to like talk about like some of the same hills that I went on that he had visited. It was incredibly surreal.
That's, man. You know what that reminds me of is did you grow up with Roald Dahl books?
A little, yeah, I did. Like, I'm a little bit hazy on remembering most of them now, other than they were just tremendously weird. Like, I remember what was it, the BFG or
Yeah, all those.
yeah.
He had a couple of books about his autobiography as a pilot in World War II. And this is kind of a non sequitur, but your illustrations remind me of his illustrator, Quentin Blake.
Oh, yeah. You're not the first person to say that,
Yeah.
actually.
Well, what I think it is as I'm looking at your art on your website, it's strong contour lines with very sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Confident, but like you when you use your washes, your watercolors, your ink washes, you
Hmm.
just let the water go wherever it wants, and it's free. It's like you on one hand you don't care where it goes, you just kind of you're letting it go wherever it wants,
Yeah.
and I'm so jealous of that.
I think it's because I'm frankly I'm not smart enough to control my paints like a lot of concept artists and stuff like that.
But I come from the other end of the spectrum where I try to control everything, and I nothing I do feels fresh. So
Hmm.
I look at your style and I like hit the table like I wish I could do that. I can't. I can't let myself. I'm so like stuck in my own head.
Mm.
Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I admire your stuff.
Oh, thank you. I mean, a lot of people, a lot of artists will say like, "Oh, it doesn't matter what tools you use; it matters how you use them." I actually disagree with that sentiment. I do think that there are certain tools that unlock certain ways of thinking for you as you use them.
Mhm.
So if you're forcing yourself to use a really fat, thick, like flat brush while working with watercolors, it's going to force you to loosen up and just kind of let fate take the paint wherever it will.
Uh-huh.
And you'll learn to accept surprises and work with mistakes in a lot of ways. And it could just be that, maybe you just haven't quite found that one tool that really clicks in your head. It might not be the same tools that I use.
Mhm.
Because I know for some people, like drawing with a pencil does it for them. But for me, if I draw with pencil, I overthink everything too much and I become too much of a control freak. Whereas if you put a brush pen in my hands or a fat, like wide, flat tipped watercolor brush, I do some of my best work because I lose so much control of it.
Mhm. Do you think part of that might be? I mean, this is. I'm being too self-conscious. Uh, it's like living dangerously. You've lived a
Yeah.
life of when I've seen you do things on your I think it was through your Twitter where you just do straight to ink. You have no underdrawing,
Hmm.
and you just let your hand tell you what this drawing is going to be like. And your drawings look freaking amazing.
Oh, thank you.
But that takes a lot of confidence and risk and acceptance of the possibility of failure. But in
It
a way that's
does.
very freeing, right?
It does. And, and to be fair, there are a lot of bad drawings that I do that, I just don't post them.
Yeah.
But even then, like months later, I'll look at those bad drawings and be like, there's kind of something in there. And I'll scan it in and draw over it digitally. I'm not sure exactly why that happened for me stylistically. Like I actually, this kind of comes into how I develop my style. And I think that style ultimately comes from turning your weaknesses into a strength. So my big problem was that if I drew in pencil, my drawings would just take forever. Like I just never quite got down this quick animator pencil approach that I always wanted to have. That most other comic book artists I think can tap into that pretty much no problem. But when I was at CalArts, I was exposed specifically this one instructor named John Mahoney, who he had us draw a lot in pen and ink, like straight out, and taught us to draw very fast and messily. And just, it was all about just speed and capturing as much story in a short amount of time as you possibly could. And if you let yourself erase, that was giving yourself too much time to look back in the rear view mirror,
Hmm.
and that kind of broke your flow. So you really had to, I don't know, just work with chaos, I guess. And that always, I think I was able to click with that because I met my dad is a bit like this. I don't really like to plan things out. I find that even if I plan things out, they never go as planned. So why bother even planning? It's a waste of time. I'd rather just say like, okay, I want to go over there. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'm just going to start moving, and I'll gather up my party of adventurers and level up along the way. If I don't make it, oh well.
Wow. I think that speaks to a certain personality type. That's really admirable.
It's,
But I
I mean,
suppose.
I was just going to say, I mean, some of it just came out of desperation, realizing that like, when you kind of sense your own mortality, it's like you don't have time to overthink things or
Jeez.
to reconsider.
Oh man, I'm exactly there right now. I guess
Yeah.
the word would be stagnation.
Hmm.
I've been going on a bunch of drives and walks this past week because I'm trying to draw my own book, and I have to sort of convince myself of the imminent failure would be so catastrophic to me that it's like I need to treat this as if I fail, I'm going to basically like my career's over.
Yeah.
And my body is not kicking in this survival instinct, and I need to jumpstart it with like I don't know, but I feel a certain stagnation because I'm looking at the art like, no, it's not coming out the way I want, and no, I want to keep redoing that panel, and
Yeah.
it's death. I
It
envy
really
the
is tough.
freshness. Yeah.
I, you know, what there is, even though I do my comic digitally, there is a definite trap that you can slip into of overworking and doing and redoing things too much. And I find that at that point, like as soon as I find myself like redrawing the same panel or page, I need to just be like, you know what? Is it serviceable? Like, does it tell just the minimum of what needs to be communicated? Okay, good enough. I'm going to move on
Hmm.
and just do better on the next page. Because at the end of the day, like if you understand that, especially in the medium with comics, I mean, in a perfect schedule, you'll be able to make every single page like a perfect feast for the eyes. But sometimes, like, if you have a strong enough story, I think that the readers, won't get hung up over the fact that you did nothing but silhouettes for that entire page. Like, look, if Frank Miller and Mike Mignola and Doug TenNapel can get away with it, I think we can find ways to.
Yeah. I always give myself a sort of I tell myself 99.9% of readers are not going to notice or care about the things that I get
Right.
hung up on. So
Hmm.
like I have to give myself a time limit. And I
Yeah,
say
that's
draw
I
yeah.
really need to go back to that too myself.
How many I mean you've been drawing your graphic novel and we'll get to that very
Yeah.
soon I hope. But it's just so interesting all these other topics too.
Mm.
But how much time do you give yourself per page, or would you say is the average time?
I was so last year I was a lot better about setting myself a time limit. Like I was finishing inking a page in about I would say on average 4 hours. Sometimes I would be able to nail them out in like 2 or 3 hours. And then there
Wow.
were a couple pages that took maybe 5 or almost 6 hours, like some of the really detail heavy ones where I'm establishing an environment that a lot of interaction is going to be going on for the next several pages.
Hmm.
So what I'll do is I'll put in a lot of sweat and tears into one page. It really takes almost a full day's work. But then the subsequent pages after that kind of take place in there, I'll be able to get away with a lot less detail because the viewer, it's already been established for the viewer where we're at, and now it's about the interaction between the characters in that place. And then the only time I'll need to do like any big setting or environmental introduction shots will be when the scene changes or something.
Yeah, manga artists talk about this a lot. And in film, there's something called the establishing shot.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime, for anyone who doesn't know, whenever you go to a new scene, you want to have a zoomed out shot of the whole environment where the rest of the scene is going to take place.
Right. And sometimes though, there's sometimes times, uh, getting a little tongue tied, but basically, sometimes you can actually start in really close up, then go out from there. If
Yeah.
if you're confident enough in taking the reader for a little bit of a ride and having them play a guessing game as you're unfolding the scene for them. I'm not high enough IQ to pull that off most of the time, but there've been a couple times where I do get an opportunity to do that, and it can have pretty surprising results.
Hmm.
Don't overdo it though.
It's
It can
hard,
be,
yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of I guess if you think of it like a flip book.
All right.
Well, comics you got to cheat because you can look at the pages non-sequentially as well. And the reader has to participate in the storytelling to sort of put themselves in the sequence of images and imagine how does one panel go to the next. And
Yeah, I tended to approach comics more from a film angle, and that might be because originally I wanted to be an animator until I did this little CalArts thing, and I realized animation was a nightmare for me. But I still, when it came down to studying composition and story flow and all that stuff, I was mostly learning from watching like Gladiator, Aliens, Terminator 2, uh, Kurosawa films, and spaghetti westerns. And I would usually pause the DVD and then sketch out the whole scene
oh,
really
cool.
quickly. I give myself like 5 minutes to sketch it all out in a Sharpie marker, and that was really, it was all that knowledge, that and just religiously copying Hellboy,
Hmm.
that that was really how I learned comic flow. Like I actually did not learn anything from superhero comics.
Yeah, I don't know what's been going on with superhero comics, but I've never been interested in them, and I'm still not. So I just assume I don't know. For me, like I can't even talk about them because I don't find them interesting. But I
Yeah.
think manga, alternative comics, indie comics, they've all been sort of evolving. Not
Mm-hmm.
evolving, but taking the best lessons learned from the history of comics and continuing to develop them. Whereas I think superhero stuff is just so stagnant. I think there's something about that with the production line. Let's just crap out a comic.
Yeah, I the only time I've really ever been into superhero stuff was, the if there was a, like, for example, Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller.
Sure.
That's freaking awesome. Like,
Yeah.
even if you're not a Batman reader or Superman DC Comics reader, that story by its own is just such a tour de force that it's great.
Hmm.
Or when I was little, the comics I mostly read were like Judge Dredd, Aliens, Predator, a lot of weird, like heavy metal, even though I wasn't supposed to be reading that as a kid.
That's cool.
But I was really into Batman versus Predator.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That was actually really cool, I thought.
I had a friend who
Um,
was obsessed with that.
yeah, and I realized later on that the only superhero stories that I really was pulled into, it wasn't because I was into them because, like, oh, it's Batman or it's X whatever man. It was usually because, like, it was just a freaking good story on its own with no prior knowledge of the ongoing Cape soap opera. Like
Hmm.
Chuck Dixon's work is amazing. His weird little Batman comic with Mick McMahon, I think his name was. I can't remember what it was called, but that was an amazing one. Or gosh, what were some others? The Killing Joke. That was another good one too.
Would you say they're good because they're enclosed stories?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because they were not. I think that's, I think you nailed it right there. They were written as great stories that stand well on their own. They're not trying to sell you the next book, which is just existing to sell you the next book, and so on and so on. I think my problem, and this, maybe you agree with this, is with a lot of Cape comics from the big two, there is no sense of scarcity. And so for me, even as a kid, it was hard for me to get into them because I always felt that they were always going to be there.
Yeah.
But I was really into Aliens and Judge Dredd and stuff like that because the availability on them was a little bit spotty at times, especially, for European and Japanese comics. And so I was just eating those up whenever I could. They just seemed so weird and desolate, and they really appealed. They would do things with their compositions that they would do really wide environmental establishing shots with no dialogue or action going on, and that I was able to relate to that as somebody who grew up in an extremely rural area with no people around,
Hmm.
and that really appealed to me.
Part of that, I think, there's theories going around that some people think in words and others think in pictures. I think what you described as, like, let's imagine a silent comic. What's his name? Gosh, he wrote The Walking Man and drew The Walking Man. But he's a Japanese artist where basically the whole comic is just a man walking around observing the world around him. There are silent comics, lots of them. But even something like Blum by Tsutomu Nihei. It's just a guy walking around blowing things up, and you have to kind of piece together. It's better than I make it sound, I promise. But for those of us who think in pictures, I suppose, we're able to stitch together what's going on by looking at one panel to the next panel. We don't need words to tell us what's happening. And I've always admired the Japanese because they follow that cinematic discipline.
A really good artist for you and whoever's listening to check out, as I mentioned him before, is Matt Rhodes. He's doing a wordless graphic novel called Tellurion, and it's freaking amazing. He's an old friend. He was actually there when I created Wyatt. But he's another one of those guys that's just a master of silent storytelling. And he'll say, though, that it's because he's actually not that great at writing dialogue. So I think if you can identify your weaknesses and use them into stylistic strengths, like that's a mark of a great storyteller.
I would agree. Yeah, I think ultimately what we're doing is, perhaps the word I like to use is craftspeople, is we want to deliver an experience to our audience and have a back and forth communication with them. And if you play to your strengths, really, like let's say part of what you're doing as a bookmaker is you want to give pleasure to your audience. And if you're good with drawing sequential pictures and that gives you pleasure, it's almost your duty to deliver that strength to your audience. And the only downside is I think, or let me ask you this in the form of a question. Do you think audiences are receptive to stories without words? Do you think maybe they've been spoiled by the current climate of comics? Do you think they even read comics? Do you think they're...
that is a tough one because I haven't really done any noteworthy silent comics to really like gauge that myself. But I don't know. I don't think that people would be unreceptive to it. It definitely is a more risky storytelling venture, and you really have to just be able to sell your visuals. So if you're in any way like kind of weak in any visual department, you're better off just at least getting some terse dialogue going. Like Matt, for example, I mean, he's the art director at BioWare, so he's a very experienced concept artist that can design just about anything he puts his mind to. So he's kind of able to get away with that silent storytelling where you feel like you're basically just looking at stills from a silent film, from the 1920s or 1900s, whatever. But if you're anyone like, a few notches lesser in experience where, you might have trouble like conveying really subtle things like facial expressions, or, you have to be able to do stuff that's really subtle to convey stuff that normally could be filled in with words. Like, for example, I can convey what a character is feeling without necessarily even showing the character's full face. Like, they could be completely in shadow, but thanks to a word balloon, we'll know their thoughts. Like, they'll be saying like, how angry they are or whatever. But if you're trying to do that silently and you don't have the expressive body language skills like a lot of animators do, like you're not great with character acting, that's going to be really hard for you, in which case a silent comic is probably not going to be a good sale for you.
Well, at the very least, I know I've noticed with your stuff that you don't have that weakness or problem. Even going through your gallery, there's you use things like silhouette and lighting to sort of invite the imagination. I'm thinking of a specific piece where one guy's kind of looking to the side and his face is in shadow and stuff. And I'm like, wow, what's the story behind there? And it's really, I suppose, meant to stimulate the imagination. I appreciate that sort of art, especially Gosh, I guess in the context of, you're drawing other guys out there in the field, and who knows what they're thinking about. But
Yeah. I find that sometimes I, I remember, like, there's, if you read 300 by Frank Miller, there's a shot with where, King Leonidas is about to depart with his band of warriors, and his wife knows that her husband's never going to return. And she turns away from him. And Frank Miller is actually, he's not like one of the best people when it comes to facial expressions. Like, he draws really kind of blocky, almost Minecraft looking faces. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like,
no, I know
I kind of like it, but
yeah.
he's, he just draws Leonidas's wife, where we always see is just her face is kind of just blacked out, and it's just her eyes and some tears streaming down her really stern face. And you're like, oh, dang. Because everything we've been seeing from her up to then is her being this, this stern wife of the king, and all that. And then we just see just a single panel, where her face is still like really cold and chiseled, and it's entirely in shadow, but there's just those tears there, and it's like, bang, that's all you need. And that probably took Frank Miller like barely 30 minutes to draw, I bet.
Yeah, but even though, gosh, it's sometimes that you can't plan that sort of thing. I remember specifically there was one time I was reading Naruto of all comics, and but by no means I don't think it's an especially deep comic, but maybe some people would stone me for saying that. But there was one panel where Naruto was looking at all these other kids, and they were playing with their parents and families and stuff, and Naruto's an orphan. And there is a specific panel where he just kind of looks like dead inside, and because he's thinking about how he wishes he had parents, and it hit me like a train. And
oh yeah,
I was thinking, like, you can't plan these panels, but like once the stars align, comics can do things to people that, like, I'll just stare at a panel for minutes, and it's so rich. But I guess I just appreciate when creators can do that sort of thing. I don't know if I get those kinds of experiences very often.
Yeah, and I know for me, like at the start of working on Wyatt, I had those experiences internally, but it took a long time in the actual drawing to make those experiences come out onto paper. So a lot of people will feel like, oh, I'm not quite feeling it with this project. Maybe I need to toss it and move on. And sometimes you do need to do that. But for me, I really just had to just keep digging, because I knew that it was down there, and I just had to, my skill level had to catch up with the idea, basically. And so a lot of it was me learning from Don Bluth, who's one of my favorite animators of all time. He did The Secret of Nim, Land Before Time, Titan AE, Anastasia, and all this stuff. And he's had some film flops, but his way of depicting, characters experiencing levels of loss and melancholy that you just never would see in Disney films, or very rarely see in Disney films, really left a deep impression on me, where I felt like I was lying to the audience if I did not depict them my characters going through just raw levels of sincere emotion, instead of trying to cover it up in this layer of chatty, self-aware irony, that I see in a lot of comics right now.
And this, in case anyone's wondering, it's spelled Wyit, Wyatt.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the story itself and your inspirations for it?
So the basic elevator pitch of it would be, if you took the kind of anthropomorphic animal world of Redwall or Disney's Tailspin, gave it the Brotherhood story of Terminator 2, and set it in the world of Nausicaa, where it's this sort of diesel punk fantasy, kind of flying world of this kind of dark age of flight. Basically, it's about this boy named Wyatt who, through some unfortunate circumstances, has to go on the run, and he is being hunted by this diabolical colonel because of a strange mark that he has. And this mark is going to kill him in a few days. And the only person who seems to know how he can find a cure for it and find answers is this mysterious rogue legionnaire named Wreck, who kind of becomes Wyatt's guardian and protector. So there's a little bit of, that Terminator 2, the Iron Giant kind of dynamic of a, vulnerable, inexperienced young boy and this like super soldier, grim protector, guardian figure. And the story kind of came out of left field for me. Originally it started as a kind of hobby coping mechanism when I was going through a period of severe depression after getting out of the Marines.
I've heard that's not uncommon. Is it a sort of, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't want to,
right?
But the shock of being back in the States, and sort of losing that sense of, it almost feels like it's real life out there and you come back and it's not real life anymore.
Yeah, it was a lot like that. It was also just it was just the realization that like you felt so unbelievably alive and vital and purposeful, when you're out there, and everything you do matters in a life or death way. Even if you're not, like outside the wire, like you're still kind of reminded of the fact that like you're in a threatened environment, and something as simple as just keeping your weapon maintained while you're bitching and moaning about it, cleaning it for hours on end down in the basement with a bunch of guys passing around a dip and all that, like that, you're still doing that because if you don't do it, it could get you or somebody else killed.
Yeah.
And when you come back home and even if you weren't necessarily like in a gunfight or something, you do get that sense of like having a hard time relating to everything going on around you, or relating to the things that people are upset about or enthusiastic about. I definitely did experience, just a complete like sensory numbness, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. I just felt like I couldn't even listen to most of my old favorite music. I wanted to do nothing but just sit down and have coffee most of the time, and then drink in the evenings until I, could sleep, I guess.
Yeah.
And it really just came down to like, once you experience that level of sensory overload and excitement and thrill and terror and purpose, and then you come back to the world of the wage grind or the student life or what have you, where you're you just kind of feel like human cattle in some ways. Like you start craving that thrill again, which can lead to dangerous decisions for some people.
Yeah.
And so that definitely made it hard for me to enjoy drawing. Like I experienced, definitely, I would describe it not even as an art block, but just an outright creative death, where I could do nothing but life drawing. Like I could only draw what was in front of me. And I kind of just went to like human copy machine mode. Yeah. But I wasn't even assimilating what I was drawing. Like I wasn't even learning anything from it.
And these are themes, you mentioned this when we were talking privately. These are themes that you want to explore in Wyatt?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I didn't want to do was a graphic novel that was another like, post 9/11 war story. I think that there's other people out there who've done that better than I could. For example, like Max Uriarte, who did the White Donkey, which is a really good one for people to check out for a much more realistic. Maybe I don't know if it was. I don't think it was autobiographical, or I could be wrong, but a more realistic depiction of the war in Iraq and stuff like that. I didn't want to do that because I'm not really interested in drawing realistic or modern day stuff. For me, I've always been more driven towards fantasy, sword and sorcery, pulp adventure kind of aesthetic. And I wanted to do something for that would be enjoyable for a younger audience without talking down to them either. One of my big problems with a lot of all ages media is that it's frankly, it's kind of toothless. And even as a little kid, I saw right through that. I was really bored to death by stuff that felt like it was kid safe. Whereas, if something had a little bit of real darkness or peril to it, that kind of made me care about the struggle for good or for redemption or survival in it a lot more.
Yeah.
As far as how my personal experience related into this story with Wyatt, I'm trying to. I guess I didn't fully realize why I was doing it when I started doing it. I just knew I had to do it, and over time, I've had time to think about it and dissect it. I started doing it because I wanted a way to kind of depict certain emotions that I was struggling with and wanted to keep hold of, but could never quite put into words or articulate to people. And another thing in it is the character of Wyatt. He's kind of in some ways like a inspired by my own experience growing up in rural California, being an outsider, a minority, very constantly bullied and having no friends and no clear prospects in life. And, and then he meets this kind of dark, brooding, brutal soldier figure who is kind of cold. He's not like a brutal, like, mean guy or anything like that, but he's definitely hardened and he's a little bit more machine like. And so there's a little bit of the two of them. One, Wyatt is kind of having to learn how to grow up a little, and Rick, on the other hand, is been sent to protect this vulnerable young kid that's kind of mystifying to him in a way that he has to rediscover a little bit about himself as well. So it's, it was a little bit of I don't want to say the term self-psychology because I don't want it to sound like, like it's something highbrow or, psychiatric or anything like that. It's not some like Carl Jungian journey, but I was basically just writing from what I knew and what I was going through. And along the way, I realized, what? There's probably something in here that other readers might find helpful or encouraging. And I think that I should probably try to make this something that people in the public could consume rather than it be just my own private hobby thing.
I think that's way more meaningful. The sort of stories that are just made to get a paycheck, I don't think they have or carry a lot of meaning for audiences. Whereas something like what you're describing, like for instance, Wyatt has a mark that differentiates him, and it'll kill him if he doesn't deal with it. That could be anything that if a lot of people grew up knowing what it was like to be bullied, and it's almost as if we had marks on us that caused people to target us. And if we didn't learn to cope with those things that made us different, it would, in a way, kill us.
Right.
But that speaks, I think, well, it certainly speaks to me, but I think it would speak to a lot of audiences to say, wait, there's more to this than just an adventure. This actually means something.
Right.
I appreciate stories like that.
And I have to be careful to not try and present it as this, this, how do I put it? I don't want to sound like somebody's like self-help guru or life coach or anything like that.
No.
Like I try to be really careful about that because, I do get DMs from people who are honestly like really struggling in life. And, I think that they sense that I'm an empathic person. Is it empathic or empathetic? I'm not sure. But,
yeah.
And I have to be really careful, that I don't like let myself be positioned or propped up as something like that. It's like I'm just making it clear that like I'm just drawing from what I know. If it helps you out, great. Or even if it just gives you a fun afternoon read, that is more than I could dream for, you
Yeah.
know? And so that's another thing. It's like the story is going to have a lot of stuff that like I'm drawing, I'm like laughing my ass off as I come up with it. And I'm like, I think people are going to enjoy this just because it's ridiculous and cool.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't want it's not going to be like this ironic, you know, self-referential kind of thing
No,
either.
I apologize. I didn't mean to make it sound like that.
Oh, no.
Do you have a script written out? Are you improvising it as you go?
I actually did an extremely detailed script originally. Like it was, I listened to Doug TenNaples' advice on it, and I think I misunderstood his advice when he said that he writes a screenplay. I took that. Sorry, I got a hiccup. I took that as like, oh, okay, so I need to write it like these Hollywood screenplays I'm reading that are incredibly descriptive and stuff. And I ended up, gosh, I think I wasted like 4 months writing this overly detailed script and then penciling out the whole thing, which came out to be a whopping 250 pages. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, this is a bloated story that I can't make any sense out of. And I started over completely from scratch.
Uh-huh.
I did rewrite the story, but I rewrote it in a different way where instead of writing in detail what was going on each page, I focused on the broad outline and then each individual scene. And then I gave myself 180 pages as my not super hard cap, but really tried to avoid going above that. And in Manga Studio, or Clip Studio Paint, which is the program I use, I just opened up a blank 180 page document. And on each blank page that I would be drawing on, I would just type out in text roughly what was going on that page. So really simple stuff like, I don't know, Wyatt and Rick are having this conversation around a campfire, and here's the key thing that needs to be said, but I don't worry myself about like getting the entire dialogue down, but I just focus on what is the key thing that needs to be communicated or said by one of the characters that the reader needs to know, and then I go on to the next page, and then from there I'll do quick pencils over that, and my pencils are very loose, like they're almost like just enlarged thumbnails basically, which I'll then enlarge and then ink over.
That reminds me of what you mentioned, or what I've seen of you not improvising, just going straight to ink. It's almost a sort of unplanned, it's like jazz.
Yeah, which is funny because I really don't listen to any jazz, but I guess I definitely identify with that improvisational style.
But there's a certain, I don't want to use the word freshness again, but there's a good jazz requires a certain mastery that I guess a lot of people can't tell the difference between good and bad jazz, but
I do know, all I know is that I like John Coltrane a lot.
Okay. The best guys like John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and all those guys, like they were super masters of their instruments and other instruments. But it's only after so many thousands of hours of practice that they can just kind of have the keys in front of them and make noise. And sometimes something beautiful comes out.
Right.
But I think for people who really love the craft, that sort of freshness cannot be planned. So the kind of thing that makes me struggle and appreciate when you talk about improvising your script and just going straight to ink, when it works, it's like a miracle, and it just makes me stop dead. Like I can't, like my mouth is, jaw drops. Like wow.
There are times where at least I do need to fall back on the basic, the drawing by numbers kind of stuff where I'm just something feels incredibly off about this figure that I'm inking out. And then I'll do a red line where I'm drawing like the skeletal and muscle structure underneath something that even if I am just going to just ink silhouette it out.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of, you have to know the rules to break them kind of thing going on. But at the same time, once you know the rules, like you don't have to tie yourself to them. Like, for example, I do know how to do geometric perspective, by grid lines and all that stuff. but every time I do it, it makes my drawings really stiff and lifeless. So the only time I really use it is if my intuitive atmospheric perspective method is having problems. Then I'll break out the old, guidelines and vanishing points and stuff like that, and see if that kind of realigns things and makes it click a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, I always, when it comes time, and I know we're going long, so I'm sorry
Oh,
to
no worries.
ramble. I always have the loosest grid and maybe a vanishing point, but I don't use vanishing points anymore. I kind of just tell myself, yeah, it'll probably be over there somewhere. And then I try to make everything conform to that point, but it doesn't have to, because if everything's perfectly right angles, it's boring.
Yeah.
But freshness, again, not to keep using that word, but in order to preserve that, it's good to have that sort of I'll just kind of use, I guess you call it atmospheric perspective, but it's like an instinct which tells you probably this is what it would look like as it fades away into the background.
Yeah, I think that's been my biggest, one of my biggest lessons over the course of this project, is to trust your instincts. I think that a lot of times, like, I don't know how to articulate things, and I don't know how to put things in words, why something is compelling me in a certain direction. But I've generally found that if I follow that urge, it will usually explain itself to me, and I'll figure out a way to make it believable and make sense story-wise. I think Doug TenNapel talks about this as well. Like, he tries to sell people stories that appeal emotionally, not to their logic and what have you.
There's a certain discipline, and I want to ask you about Doug in a minute. But I guess one way to articulate it is the essence. One of the essences of cartooning is to draw or render something how it feels, not how it actually looks.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it takes a lot of discipline to do it, and then it takes even more discipline to let go of everything you've learned. I sometimes find, like, when I have a whiteboard in my kitchen with my wife, sometimes we draw notes to each other in cute cartoons. But I find I love my drawings when I just draw on the whiteboard for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I like that more than something I've worked on for 2 hours.
I know the feeling exactly well. Like, there have been so many times where, whether it's at like conventions or other anywhere where a bunch of artists will kind of gather together, there'll be one of those things where they'll unfurl a bunch of paper, and it's just sort of like the drawing wall or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll doodle something on there, and it'll have a certain zing and zang to it that my sketchbook stuff doesn't have. And I'm kind of like, dang, I did a pretty good job on this drawing that's going to get covered up in a couple hours.
Yeah.
And I do think that, when you really loosen up, not just loosen up, because a lot of times when I tell myself, like, okay, yeah, I'm getting hyped up, I'm warming up, and I'm going to loosen up, like, I actually produce utter crap that way. If I just go into it without even thinking about it, and I just throw chaos around, suddenly things will appear in the chaos that I can work with. I think, and there's several quotes by, I can't remember the samurai master's name, but he wrote Hagakure. And I recommend that everybody who's a storyteller, artist, or bodybuilder read this. It's a great book. It's I would say it's as much required reading as The Art of War by Sun Tzu and Sun and Steel by Yukio Mishima. Mm-hmm. But there's a saying in there about how, generals who stick around, who spend, all their time in their tent planning over a map, will just have their tent burned down around them by men who recklessly charged into battle. That's not true every single time, but the point is that there is such a thing as overthinking things, and you do have to let yourself, you have to give in to that animalistic Bronze Age mindset component of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with the arts, I would say. I don't know anything about actual fighting, but when it comes to art, you can plan and plan, but there is... again, going back to Quentin Blake, if anyone's familiar with his stuff, there's just, maybe it's not always precise art, or one character's limbs are too long, or the face is weird, but it just looks alive.
Yeah, same thing with Peter Chung, the creator of Aeon Flux. He also
Yeah.
did some animations for the Animatrix, and he also did the animated series of based off of Alexander the Great, where it's set in this really weird, kinky cyberpunk world. It's freaking amazing, and all of his figures are like really distorted and almost alien in their proportions. Like it's almost like Egon Schiele kind of levels of exaggeration, and yet it works wonderfully.
Hmm.
And that just comes from a mixture of knowing what it is you're distorting and also being able to just trust that 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 subconscious part of yourself that just kind of knows where to end, I guess.
Hmm. It's, in a way, we have to give ourselves permission to fail.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
audiences.
that's a big part of it too. Is I always I people are I find that when people overthink their artwork, they're framing it in terms of, if this comic sucks, I'm gonna have to scrap it. Whereas if you look at it uh, from the angle of, if this page ends up sucking, I can just, I'm not going to use it in the book, but I can save it for later and maybe, I don't know, harvest some of the character poses from it for a future page or something, just to kind of give yourself a shortcut down the line.
Mhm. Man, there's so much to learn there, I suppose.
Yeah.
Again,
You got to use every part of the buffalo.
yeah, man, I've really got to meditate on that and look up these books that you mentioned.
Yeah, I highly recommend Sun and Steel if you can get if you can get your hands on a copy. It's pretty rare now.
I'll look it up.
It's a fascinating book, and I related to it tremendously because, long story short, Yukio Mishima was Japan's most celebrated like novelist and playwright, got the Pulitzer Prize and everything. But he suffered from severe survivor's guilt because all of his friends, they enlisted to fight during World War II, and he was disqualified from enlisting because he had a really bad like pneumonia or something when he showed up to the draft board. And in because he always wanted to think of himself as samurai, he felt tremendously shamed about that. And so I think when he was like in his mid 30s, he took up bodybuilding just out of the blue, and he formed a small kind of gang like of these handsome young men who are like his private militia. They all like lift weights together and do kind of survivalist training and stuff. And for him, he saw this as a necessary component of being an artist. Like he wanted to turn himself, his physical self, into the work of art that he was in his literary self. Is a very how do I put it? I found that for me, like I related a lot to it, both from my military experience, but even just by lifting weights. I find that I get like 80% of my story ideas occur to me not when I'm at the computer looking at my notes and drawings, but when I'm in the gym,
Mm.
experiencing an almost psychedelic high after a ridiculously taxing set, and suddenly I can look at a story puzzle with extreme clarity and solve it out. And so that's why I always tell artists, obviously we can't all afford to get into fistfights and stuff. Those days are past. But start lifting weights, and I think that to get your mind, to truly ascendant levels, you have to put your body through torture and strength training.
Yeah, I suppose there's a certain. I don't know how the brain works and all that stuff, but once you reach a certain stage of, it's both rest and stimulation at the same time. When your brain is in this weird place of, I'm relaxed, but I'm also thinking. For me,
Yeah.
it could be something as simple as going for drives or walks.
Oh, yeah.
But exercise is definitely something I have to pick up again.
Yeah, and a lot of artists will say like, oh well, I'm not an athletic person, or oh, I'm too self conscious to go to the gym or sign up for a fighting instruction or whatever. And it's like, I think that that's all the more reason to do it, because I think that, for people who are rather, sensitive people, like, who we all probably got bullied by people who would like be like, oh, dude, you're gay or whatever, for having that kind of aesthetic obsession when we're younger. I think that that'll give you a finer appreciation for both the physical and visual aspects of whether you sign up for, I don't know, swimming or fighting sport or just weightlifting or I don't know, or just trail running. I think that it will open up new creative channels in your mind that were previously closed off to you. A lot of people say like, oh, you need to do DMT and drugs and all this stuff. And it's like, no. Look, I did all that stuff. I can tell you these days, all you need is you just need to go lift some freaking weights and drink black coffee with no sugar in it.
I can definitely relate to the coffee thing.
Yeah.
But what they're trying to say, I suppose, is to put yourself in. I know this is silly and mysterious sounding. I don't mean it to be, but like I always say, art. We say art is communicated through a medium, and I say medium in the sense of like spiritual stuff, right? But like. If I'm going to be receptive to whatever ideas are out there in the universe or in my brain or whatever, I have to put myself in a state of rest and reception where I am able to listen to the voices. No, I don't mean actual voices, but maybe it's something like fishing. If I'm in a rowboat, I have to have my rod in the water and I'm just waiting. Sometimes the ideas come to you like crazy. Sometimes they jump in your boat. Sometimes you only catch one fish. But you have to be in the boat fishing. You can't be like, let's say, I don't know, somebody might say like, oh, I got to be out there partying or whatever else. Like they think, wherever they think ideas come from. I think you have to put yourself in a state. Maybe everybody's different. For you, it's exercise, that sort of thing. And maybe that would work for a lot of people. Yeah. To put yourself in that place where you're able and willing to listen to ideas.
Yeah, I think one bit of advice I would have for a lot of artists is rather than forcing yourself to take on art jobs that just kind of suck your creative soul and force you to draw a bunch of crap that, one, you don't like and you never get to show to anyone, if you can, try to take frankly, a kind of menial job that's physically demanding but lets you daydream. I think that we are so deprived of daydreaming. I know it sounds like a boomerism to say like, oh, these millennials and their smartphones and blah, blah, blah.
No, man, it's true.
We are assaulted by information at every step, and I think that any opportunity you can get to let yourself get a little bored and just daydream will help you out a lot, because that's part of the reason why I right now I'm driving around a flatbed diesel delivery truck with no air conditioning and 110 degree weather, and I'd rather be doing that than working in retail or in some office job with catty people who gossip and ask me if I watched The Office last night. I like this because one, I can catch up on my podcasts, but two, like I just get a lot of time where I'm just going deep into my own mind and just thinking and building up that itch where I'm like, okay, I'm trapped in this freaking truck thinking about stuff and getting ideas. All right, I can't wait to get home and execute them. Whereas if you're always at your sketchbook, you're always at your drawing desk, you're gonna kind of get to a point where it becomes too mundane. It becomes a chore. You do need to find somewhere that is your place to think, whatever that is. And if you can monetize it in the form of a ditch digging job or something that's unglamorous but lets you be away from soul draining type of work, I would say grab onto that.
Yeah, I've always said, oddly, exactly what you're saying. When I used to work at a print shop, or even back when I was in school in class, not paying attention to the teacher, that seemed to be when the most ideas came to me. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if my brain, as a sort of survival instinct, is like, okay, I have to entertain myself now. I'm going to tell myself a story.
You are dangerous if you daydream these days. Look at how kids. Young boys especially, but I think it affects everybody. But I think it's especially young boys who tend to be a lot more rambunctious. If we are inattentive to whatever the authority figure in front of us is telling us to pay attention to, you're basically treated like you have a pathology or something.
Yeah.
I was put on all kinds of medication and all that stuff as a kid to just dumb you down. And even once you get out of school, you're basically treated as a alien or a rube, if you're not caught up with whatever the thing is to be obsessed about at the moment or to care about. And if you tell people you don't care about the wrong thing, you're like, you can be in big trouble. Or maybe on a more likely level, you'll just not be invited to the next dinner party or something. Right. In which case, it's like, why would you want to hang out with those people anyways?
Yeah, I would say so. A lot of artsy types, or let's say creative types, they seem to live out there on the fringes of what's considered normal. We don't get invited to every party, and when we do, actually, I find it's almost dangerous. I don't mean to take too much more of your time, but hanging out too much, even with other artists, it's almost like, no, we should be making stuff. We shouldn't be hanging out.
Yeah. And part of why I went into the Marines and all that stuff was also to be able to truly appreciate the arts. Once you have something, really taken away from you, or you realize how fragile it is and what an anomaly or an error, I would say, industrial civilization is, you gain a new appreciation for the little comforts and beauties that we get to have. And I think it does kind of force you to prioritize what you spend your time on aesthetically or around. Like, I find myself like it used to be that, I would just kind of consume whatever game or Netflix show came my way. Now, if I find something that's like, as soon as I sense like something just aesthetically grating about it, I'm like, nah, hard pass instantly. Like, I don't waste any time on it. I don't care what it's about. I'm only going to invest myself in whatever's beautiful. I don't care who's creating it. Like some people will be like, oh, I don't want to read stories written by SJWs and blah, 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 or blue hairs. I think that's dumb. It's like, look, I take from a very Orthodox Christian perspective where you have to be the bee. You have to take what is good wherever you can get it, whether it comes from, your true faith or whatever, or from these, pagans and what have you. And I think life is too short to waste your attention on, ugliness and nihilism.
They say one of the greatest mysteries, again talking about C.S. Lewis and those guys, is what is beauty, and why are we so obsessed with like, it's a very deep question for another time, I suppose. But I think
sometime I'd love to talk C.S. Lewis with you.
Sure, man. I used to read him like crazy back in the day. We could do another chat sometime.
Yeah, that'd be good.
But yeah, I think when we're talking about things like even your pursuit of all the various things that you described as pursuing when you went to Afghanistan, and your love for the aesthetic, I think there's something in there that's it's super, super deep. The things that we pursue as meaningful, maybe even timeless and nostalgic. There's something in there that's like, once you kind of look at the most naked and scary things of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be conscious? I think for people like us, the answer is somewhere in the aesthetics, the arts, music, something. I don't mean to go super dark, but like when I think about how, fragile life is on this planet, and who knows what's going to be remembered in 10,000 years or a million years. But like, we're here now, and all the beautiful things that are in front of us, I think, are the most meaningful things that we could pursue with our time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's, we'll have to get into in a future conversation on, how that kind of factors into orthodoxy for me, and how I'm going to get you back in the Greek Orthodox Church of your forefathers.
I
but no,
visit all the time. I love it.
I do think that a big struggle, especially in America, is we're wrestling with this secularized version of Puritanism where we're confused about what is beauty and what is a good aesthetic, because I think that it kind of grates on me when I hear people say like the arts are a lot of people, like I would call them like boomer cons or something. They would say like, oh, who cares about the humanities and culture and stuff like that? It's just a bunch of liberal arts frou-frou stuff. I'm like, well, look, what are your kids watching on TV? What kind of games are they playing?
Yeah.
If you're not involved in that or clued in, like you're 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 gonna be forgotten by history, because I mean history is written by people who just define culture and aesthetics. And I mean, just ask yourself what is going to be dug up in 10,000 years and who is making it.
Yeah. Things like you described, a shield buried in the mountains of Afghanistan, that's going to be remembered. In some ways, you could say that was an art, that was a craft.
Oh, yeah.
The things, I mean, to put it one way, all of culture and the things that we do on a daily basis, the 9 to 5 is like soil, but I always say art is like the flower that comes out. It takes all this soil to create one flower, and watering and care and nurturing, but it's the flower that's remembered. There's something immortal that something that some people might even say hints at the divine in art, something timeless, something eternal almost.
Yeah, definitely.
The miracle of life itself is like, look at how all these cells arrange themselves. It's like this crazy, like we're just, by arranging pixels on a screen, we're just emulating the very thing that makes us alive in the first place. We're arranging things. Like all this crude matter of the universe, all these elements and all that crap, ink on a page, and we are the people emulating the very thing that stitched it all together, and somehow you end up with this picture on a piece of paper. And it means something.
And I think we have to take like a contradictory view on it, where at the same time I think it's good to think of ourselves as we're just lowly people who are just churning out thrills and laughs and stuff, but at the same time understand that we do have a responsibility to not lie to people, and to give them the truth as we understand it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're all at different stages of our lives, and I think as craftspeople, like you, by no means, I don't imagine you would ever stop drawing.
Yeah.
It's just part of us, but I think as we continue being craftspeople until our arms stop working, I'm sure we're going to come up with all kinds of interesting pieces of art that'll communicate as we continue our lives and learn whatever this this journey, man.
Yeah, I hope so. If I ever stall out again on art and it stops working out for me, then I don't know, I'll just become a mercenary in Africa, I suppose.
And then you can write about that. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, hopefully it won't come to that.
No. But I think just watching your art and looking at what I've seen of your stuff, I've said this on Twitter, I crave to look through your sketchbook sometime.
Oh yeah, if we ever meet up, I'll definitely
yeah, dude,
bring a sketchbook along to have you leaf through it. I'd love to look through yours too.
Oh man, I'd be embarrassed, but showing your stuff is it's for the other person, not for yourself. So yeah, I'd love to show you guys my stuff and stuff. But yeah, we've been going for about an hour and a half, a little over that. I'm so sorry for going so long, but
no, this was fun.
Yeah, you're a really interesting guy. I've been circling all our different networks, hearing your name over and over, and it's been so much fun finally talking to you.
I'm an international man of mystery. I can't help it.
So how do people once again look you up, and how can they back your project?
Yeah, so I will be launching an Indiegogo campaign soon. The best way to make sure that you get in on that is just go to reaganlodge.com. My name is spelled ReaganLodge, like Ronald Reagan, like ski lodge.com, and sign up for my mailing list that's right there on the front page. I don't use it for any kind of like annoying promos or spam or anything like that. It's strictly for stuff related to the graphic novel. So once I know when the launch date is going to be for that, I will blast that out to everyone on my mailing list. They're going to be the first people to know about it before Twitter knows about it, before YouTube knows about it, before Instagram knows about it. So they're going to be my elite, my chosen, my legionnaires. It's going to be like the mailing list is going to be like the red telephone that I have in my bunker on my secret volcano base island, and you're going to get a call at 3 a.m. on that suitcase satellite phone, and it's going to be from me, and I'm going to tell you that it is time. I've pressed the button.
All right, so you guys heard it here. Go to his website, sign up for his mailing list, and
I'm on Twitter, YouTube. Twitter is where I do the most chit chat. Instagram is obviously images only, and YouTube, I need to get better about updating it. And I'm also on Twitch, where I do multiple art live streams a week. It's across every platform. I'm just Reagan Lodge, all one word. And just find me there. Say hello.
Well, there you guys go. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as I've been participating in it. But it's so much fun to hear from someone with such a rich life story, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
You've been great. It's been great talking to you, George.
Yeah, man, a pleasure. I'm going to hit stop recording now in a little bit. If you guys want to continue following on this channel, I'm going to be talking with a whole bunch of people this week. So make sure you check back on the channel later this week for more interviews. So once again, Reagan, thank you for coming. I'll talk to you guys next time.